know that there is rather no particular conversation on data privacy in Africa. Do we necessarily know why this has not been touched base with since we're living in a digital era?
I think that whilst that may be true to a certain degree, we're being compelled to have the conversation nowadays because of the fact that we're no longer an African problem. We're a global, data is a global problem. So in order for us to transact with global superpowers in Europe or in America or the East for that matter, we have to comply with all of those data regulation policies. So we are definitely being forced to have that conversation now.
Dennis, of course, we did read some of the reports saying that much of the uproar came up after it was revealed that Cambridge Analytica, the same company that was in saga with Facebook, of course, fetching millions of personal users' data, was involved in Kenya and Nigeria's elections, of course, working to fix them. And this was rather discussed at the Africa Union's, of course, cyber security and personal data protection earlier this year. Tell me, what were some of the conversations that were carried at that time?
So the critical thing to note is that Africa needs to have policies in place to store, manage, regulate, and check the quality of our data continuously. The fact that the breaches that happen in Africa are not necessarily linked to African problems or African data policies, but rather global companies, means that we have to be part of that conversation. So we have a unique opportunity and a window, I think, in Africa because of the fact that we don't have many legacy systems that we have to rebuild, and we have an opportunity to refashion and reframe a lot of our infrastructure, a lot of our policies, a lot of our processes, and the way in which we manage our data across corporate and private networks. So Hitachi Vantara.
All right.
Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
No, Dennis, I was just about to ask you, what kind of opportunities does data usage present to African organizations or firms on the continent?
Oh yeah, before we even talk about opportunities and how to make that data relevant to our customers or to the African continent, I think the first thing we need to acknowledge is that we have to have the building blocks correct first. So how do we store that data? So data is not a geography-specific problem. We need to align with our African counterparts around how we store that data, how we manage that data, what is relevant for our customers, our citizens, and then how we help make that data relevant to Africa. The opportunities are fantastic because we are, by and large, a very connected continent. There's a very significant amount of mobile users. There's a significant number of financial services institutions that have huge amounts of data. And as a continent, we're very active on social media and mainstream media. All of that data represents an opportunity for us to understand the problems of our continent a bit better and be proactive in the way we manage those challenges going forward. Our stairway to value as Hitachi Vantara is to start by organizing our data and storing it better. We then enhance that data, make it relevant and tag the data, make it a bit more intelligent. We then activate the data, making it available to multiple parties to be able to collaborate, to be able to give you the first view of some analytics and some predictability. And then we get to the point where we either monetize the data, and I don't necessarily mean in the commercial sense only, so but getting the intelligence out of the data to become more predictable in the way we do things in our continent.
Of course, Dennis, now we've spoke about how this can actually help businesses grow. We saw a word from Forrester saying that if just a 10% increase could happen in data accessibility, we'll be looking at $65 million in additional net income. Now the question becomes, if we have all of that and the incentive, of course, to reach data is quite so high, why is it being so hard to actually enforce the policies?
I think there's two reasons that come to mind. One is, I don't think that not just Africa, but globally, anyone anticipated this huge astronomical growth in the amount of data we'd have to synthesize, we'd have to distill, we'd have to understand. And no one really had, apart from great tag words like big data and data lakes, no one really had a handle on how quickly this was going to grow. So the first thing I have to say is that we haven't been able to keep pace with the amount of data we're getting from the unstructured world. And the second thing is I have to talk about is a genuine skills problem we have, not just in Africa, but globally. And that's not just in understanding the data, but that's in understanding just what is required to manage the data. So traditional infrastructure or software or platforms required to manage structured data are no longer all that relevant for the unstructured world. So all of this data coming into all these organizations need to be managed in some way, and we don't have the skills globally to be able to attend to this problem. You know, we use the analogy, or we use the term data lake to manage big data. I think it's become more of a data ocean now, just massive amounts of data that nobody's been able to get a handle on.
All right. Dennis, before I let you go, what do you see as the way forward for data privacy on the continent? Are we seeing political will to actually put these policies in place? And that will be my last one.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both political will, but I think that private sector and companies have to start taking these regulations a lot more seriously. Financial institutions, across every industry vertical, we need to make sure that we, not just for the sake of compliance, but I think for the privacy and the sacrosanct of the data that we handle every day, we need to take this very seriously and feel compelled and obliged to make this work. Yeah.